strangers would come up to me and try to give me advice or correct my form, which made me so mad because I was like, I'm studying on the internet, you don't understand. And then when somebody comes in who's newer than me, then I can sort of haze that person and be like, oh, you don't know that you need to squat 5 reps and drink a gallon of milk a day, you f***ing moron.
I didn't really understand why people needed bulking and cutting phases.
If I can squat 1.5 times my body weight, then I'll have made it.
Genetic hierarchies, very comfortable topic. Welcome to Doomscroll. I'm your host, Joshua Citarella. My guest is young Chomsky, producer of the podcast TrueAnon, creator of the mobile app Phomo, and a natural athlete with 16 years of experience.
Something that stands out as kind of I feel like on the internet they call this a canon event. I remember really clearly being, I guess, 16, 17, and I was on this journey of guitar playing, and I played a show, and what I remember thinking, it was my first gig, and it was in the summer, and me and some friends formed a band, and we did covers, and I remember we played like Weezer and No Doubt, and I think Nirvana, and it was an outdoor stage, and I remember planning, I'm gonna take my shirt off on stage, and it's gonna be like a real rock and roll style move, and I'm gonna like jump up and down with my guitar, and people laughed at me because they were like, oh, you should eat something, you look like you just got out of concentration camp.
Really?
Yeah.
Really?
And, you know, people think that that's...
146 foot, it's a pretty skinny guy.
You know, and nobody
guy.
feels, not that I was so oppressed, right? But like people are more willing to make fun of somebody for being too skinny than they would be for if they thought somebody's too fat, right?
Right.
That's more obviously like rude and offensive. But that really stuck in my head. But it wasn't until years later that I decided that I felt like I could do anything to change it, because I was like, well, this is just how I am. I remember being online, and this is also like a weirdly specific recollection. This would have been 2007 or 2008, I think. There was these photos went viral of this very photogenic pole vaulter, this female pole vaulter, who I think was like a college freshman.
Okay.
And, you know, because there were these very striking, very beautiful photos of this young female athlete. And they went viral for, you know, men on the internet being horny about them. But I just remember seeing these pictures, and there was this thread on some message board that I was on. I don't remember exactly which one, but this was, you know, pre the internet platforms that we have now, where it was message boards.
Yeah.
And
what kind of message board is this? Is this a
PHP BB style?
Okay. Is it for I was like part of gamer guilds. Like I played Counter-Strike, I would do PHP forums.
Yeah.
Like what kind of community was this gathered around?
You know, I don't remember exactly what this one was, but it might have been something like that. I was also on gaming forums. I played Counter-Strike. I remember somebody saying, they were like, oh, well, like what kind of guy do you think she would go for? And there was a reply that was something like, well, she's in good shape, takes really good care of herself, probably wants her man to do the same. And I was like, that makes sense. So like, if I want a girlfriend who's in shape, I need to be in shape. So let me think about how to do that. And I think I went in my memory, like right from there to another window, and it was like, how to lift weights. But the time was right at that point, because this was the beginning, or, you know, in the middle of the kind of new boom of online communities around this sort of thing, where...
What year are we in here?
So this is like 2008.
A lot of people don't even have Facebook yet. Yeah. This is early.
Yeah.
Okay.
But, you know, before in the earlier era, or the previous generation, it would have been largely print magazines. You know, the muscle mags were kind of a big source of how this kind of stuff got disseminated, if not like knowing a coach or somebody at your gym or at your school or whatever. But there were a lot of these forums and communities starting to pop up around these different programs. And again, these were all on like kind of single purpose communities, as opposed to Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. And so I think the first thing that I discovered and got onto was Strong Lifts 5x5, which is still around.
Okay.
And if you're not familiar, Strong Lifts, it was made by this guy, Mehdi, who I don't know if too much is really known about him, but he kind of, he didn't like invent anything per se. I think he was like an SEO guy, but he made this website that got a lot of traffic, and he was really good at capitalizing on that.
Yeah.
And it was kind of a lot of information, which I didn't know at the time, but had been around in sort of like powerlifting style, or like football player training programs for decades before, but he kind of packaged it in this internet native format. And so Strongless 5x5 was about full body training with barbells 3 days a week and doing sets of 5. So meaning you're lifting heavy weights, you're doing squats, deadlifts, bench press, overhead press. Those are the bulk of your program. And you're trying to increase every session. And a lot of the DNA of that is taken from Starting Strength, which I would discover later. And then, in many other programs, again, all this stuff has been around, but Starting Strength is one of the most, in some sense, it's like the text of a lot of this stuff.
That's how I came across it, which is like, this was like the internet godfather of, especially spending a lot of time on 4chan, like Starting Strength, doing 5x5s, all of these different weird lifting programs and diets and so on. Like that is the kind of like the sacred text. That's the original. That's what people go to.
Yeah.
So you're around 23 at this time. You're playing in a band. I imagine your apartment looks something like the guys live like this and don't see any problem with it. You've got a TV on the floor. Yep. Maybe you're about to get a squat rack and put this into your house, and you sleep like a Spartan with a stone pillow or something on the floor. And you've never lifted before. What do you decide to do once you find this information online? Because now you've got the book, you've got your guide of how to do it, but you have to find a gym, you got to go somewhere, and you got to learn to do these movements based off of, largely like stick figure diagrams of how to do 5x5s.
Yeah, very much not the case that like I was saying, I thought of myself as this different type of person, and that there was some unbridgeable gap between me and the sort of guy who could call himself an athlete. And I think there's an interesting factor in that I feel has given me maybe a greater ability to teach people than somebody for whom it does come very naturally, right? Like if you're naturally gifted, you don't have to struggle in the same way.
You had to work for it.
Yeah, I mean, everybody has to work for it to some extent, right?
But you had to work harder.
I had to, I think there's some sense to that. When you mentioned wanting to put a squat rack in your home, I would have loved at the beginning if I could have done that, because I, like I think many people, was nervous about going to a gym and being seen in public as somebody who doesn't already know what they're doing. I was worried people would be looking at me and I would look silly. Again, like, it's not only having to learn a new movement, but it's self-consciousness about your body. Like I felt like I was this baby deer learning to walk, and that is very much what it looks like when you're trying to squat and you've never done it before. It's not just weakness, but it's inability to produce the movement pattern. It's lack of balance. It's lack of flexibility. The requirements, the flexibility requirements for doing these kind of lifts are not super high. It's not like gymnastics, which has a much higher floor for flexibility, but they are there. And most of us, if we sit in chairs, we have desk jobs, we're not used to getting in a position to safely and efficiently squat and deadlift. There was a very brief period where I had these little adjustable barbells at home that I think I got from like the Sports Authority. They were like 1-inch barbells and these weights.
Yep.
And I had such a small space in this apartment, and I tried to do it. I remember like looking at myself in the reflection of the turned off TV screen and like trying to squat, and that lasted, thankfully.
Because you don't have a mirror.
Right, not a mirror, not a full mirror that I could see myself in.
Oh my God.
So thankfully I got over that quickly enough, but I know that for a lot of people this is like a huge mental hurdle. But I started going to the JCC gym. I think this was because I was living in Philly, but I was still working in South Jersey. I was teaching guitar. That was how I made a living. So I would go to the JCC, which was in my hometown, and it was like mostly high school kids and older folks. But again, I remember very distinctly not just the feeling of self-consciousness, but being kind of validated in that feeling, because strangers would come up to me and try to give me advice or correct my form, which made me so mad, because I was like, I'm studying on the internet. You don't understand. I looked at these books. I know what I'm doing. But I also remember eventually, and this really satisfying feeling that that dropped off and then stopped happening when I got enough weight on the bar. Yes. Because you see the guy with like a 25-pound plate on each side of the bar, and he's shaky, and you think, oh, I'm gonna come up and give this guy advice, which I would never do now, even if somebody, I just don't give advice to people unless they ask for it. Even if they ask for it, honestly, I'm often loath to give advice because it's a hassle. I worry about myself. But when you got 3 plates on each side of the bar and you're squatting, people don't say shit to you.
The great irony, though, is that sometimes the guys who have 3 plates on either side of the bar and are going a quarter of the way down,
true.
Those are the ones who need the most advice.
That's true.
The guys who are doing the 25s, as long as they're, getting parallel, like that's okay. When you step into these gyms, there's a lot of high school guys. What is the culture like? Is there a bodybuilding culture? Is there a community around this stuff? Like, what kind of people are you meeting?
I've been in a couple of gyms that were more like barbell clubs, where I had this one, and this only lasted for me a brief time, but when I was living in Philly, I met some people and they essentially had a storage unit and they had barbells and plates and, some rings hanging from the ceiling. And if you were a member, you got a key. So you could go there at midnight.
That's great.
You'd go and you'd maybe see somebody else training and you'd spot each other or whatever. Yeah, I've had a couple of like garage gym situations like that. Or for a time, actually, again, this is when I lived in Philadelphia, I made the acquaintance via internet, several degrees removed from people I knew, but a guy who was the strength and conditioning coach at the University of Pennsylvania, who would sometimes, like at certain times, he would let me come in with him to the football player gym, which was like being in Valhalla at the time. It was just racks and racks and racks and every possible piece of, and it would be totally empty because we'd have to go early in the morning on the weekend. But his name was Jim Steele, which was like, what a badass name.
What a name. Okay.
Job. But yeah, or...
That's kind of, I think his name determined his whole life.
Yeah,
you don't get a Jim Steele and then go on to be a dental hygienist or something.
Very Charles Dickens. But so it was that, and I was working out for a while at this, what do they call it? Gray Skull Barbell, which I think then became the name of a program that kind of disseminated on the internet by this guy, John Schaefer, who was at one point the sort of right-hand man of Mark Rippetoe, who was the author and coach behind Starting Strength. But John was also, he was in the suburbs of Philly and he had this garage gym situation and I would drive 30, 40 minutes to get there.
Wow.
But it was very different, because that was the kind of place where people knew each other. Obviously it was small, tight-knit, and you'd be doing your own thing, but like somebody across the gym is going for a PR, a personal record, and everybody stops what they're doing and comes over and watches and cheers them on. Or, you don't have headphones in because we're actually sharing the space. And I wouldn't necessarily I would have chosen different music, but that's fine. When you got your earbuds in and everybody else does too, we're all kind of in our separate lanes. It's
you kind of got a real sweet spot of the internet is what it sounds like, because if you find Starting Strength online, you find Rippetoe, you've got, I imagine, forums and message boards and this archive of materials to go through. But from that, you found a pretty direct link into that community where you could go and physically share a space with the people and do the stuff you're reading about.
It's huge to be able to work with somebody that you trust in person and not just rely on reading and watching videos, although you can certainly do that. And I did that for a long time. And it's not just watching the videos, but videoing myself, getting over that other mental hurdle too, of feeling embarrassed about setting up my phone and recording myself. Once I cleared that, it was like, that was huge.
You have an online life at this time also, right? Which is how you found this gym. You're participating, I imagine, in Starting Strength forums, online communities, and things like that.
Yeah.
As well as the IRL experience.
Yeah.
Can you tell us what it was like if you could reconstitute that period? Because we're talking probably, 2008, 2009 era of the internet?
Yeah.
What is the Starting Strength message board like during that period?
There's a double-edged sword to it because, the good parts are what we've been talking about. There's community, people who have more knowledge than you and who want to share it, and you can parlay that into meeting people in real life. But then it also, like any community, becomes insular, and there's certain dogma, things that are taken on faith in the community and that become, especially when there's a charismatic figure at the top, in this case, Mark Ripito kind of sets the tone, and then you get people who join. I mean, this is just the nature of any community probably, but especially an online kind of text-based community. Like if I'm a newcomer, I see how the old heads, the experienced people talk and the things that they take to be true. And if I want to become accepted and be given respect by the other people in the community, I then start to adopt their manner of speaking and their opinions about things, right? And then when somebody comes in who's newer than me, then I can sort of haze that person and be like, oh, you don't know that you need to squat 5 reps and drink a gallon of milk a day? You fucking moron.
Go mad?
Yeah, I mean, so that's one of the kind of articles of faith that I can talk about more, but just the general. So, all this is to say that stuff was really valuable in terms of, I learned a lot from it. It was a good experience. If I were to start again today, or like, I don't train now the way I did then, partly because I'm older and my priorities have shifted, but partly because I don't believe all the same things that I did then, which I took people's word for things, which, what can you do? How can you do otherwise, right? And this is kind of a bind that people find themselves in as a beginner, I guess, when you don't know what you don't know, right? So like I think a lot of personal trainers in the typical gym are bad at what they do, or bad at giving good training advice. Maybe they're good at making you feel good, like you have a friend, or I don't know what people get out of it. But when I see people training and then paying for it in a gym, a lot of times I'm like, this is awful.
I'm the dumbbell butler.
Yes.
He brings you the weights.
Yeah.
And that's,
But as that person who's new to the gym, how do you evaluate that? You don't have the expertise to evaluate the person that you're paying to be the expert, right? So you kind of have to go through, nobody can like hand you the knowledge on a platter, because again, you wouldn't know that from false knowledge, right?
Well, there is one thing that, especially for programs like Starting Strength, when you're doing 5x5s, for me, a clear indication of progress is that in my notebook, the numbers go up every week.
Yes.
And I remember when I first started lifting with Brad, this is like years and years back now. This is like 10 years ago or longer. When I first did a squat, I was like, oh, this is terrible. This feels awful. I don't ever want to do this again. And it was just the bar.
Yeah.
It was just the bar. It was like so embarrassing. And then within, I don't know, probably like 3 months or something like that, I was actually lifting and I was putting up, respectable numbers for somebody who'd been doing it for 3 months. And it wasn't just the bar, and I was adding plates to it. And I just saw this explosive growth that I knew the program worked because I saw the change in my body. And I saw the numbers go up that I physically could not do that the week before. I just made a new PR, just made a new one after that. And that became this kind of like self-legitimizing mechanism that I knew I was incrementally making progress towards something. And I didn't need to take anybody's advice because I just had the proof right there in front of me. At this time, when you're 23, when you first get into this stuff, like many people, you're doing Starting Strength, you're doing Go Mad, you're just trying to put on as much mass as possible. It works for you. You go through this process and you do, achievements, lifts that most people will never be able to accomplish in their lifetime. And you took this very seriously. You did the diet, you did the program, and you could just see, in front of you every week that you moved this amount, and you weren't able to do that before.
Yeah, so I mean, the term of art is progressive overload, right? And that's going to be a fundamental aspect of any effective strength training program. The idea that over time you're lifting more than you were before, which sounds really basic, but a lot of people aren't doing that, or they don't have a structure that allows them to do that. And I do think that beyond being physically effective, that's so psychologically powerful, right? Because like when I talked about being 16 and having these failed attempts to lift, it's like I didn't know what I was doing, and I would just like look in the mirror, and of course it doesn't look any different, so I'd give up. But the idea that you have this structure where you say, okay, today I lifted 45 pounds, just the bar on my squat, and that's nothing, that's very light in the grand scheme of things, but next time I'll come in and I'll do 50 pounds, and the time after that, 55 pounds. And extrapolating that, you eventually are moving heavy weight, and you keep track of that progress. You see that, and that sort of like data-oriented or tangible approach was really gratifying. It was addictive. I think people often say, you got to find something you enjoy in the gym. Just do what you enjoy doing, play a sport, or it has to be fun. And I get that. That makes sense. I mean, there's certainly some sense in which I enjoy lifting weights, but there's another sense in which it's very difficult and painful, and I don't like it at all. I want to get it done as quickly as possible. But what I enjoy is seeing that progress, seeing that line move up over time, being able to succeed at something that I failed at before, and knowing that there's more to come, and that I'm on the right path.
How long did you do that kind of powerlifting program?
The idea of the beginner program, and this is another fundament of starting strength, is that it's a linear progression.
Right.
Meaning that every single workout, you're going to add load versus the previous workout. And then you'll hit a plateau and you'll do a reset, and then you'll be able to break through that plateau. But at a certain point, the human body is not linear, as we were joking about earlier. This joke that I saw online comes to mind, where there's this man holding his infant child, and he's like, here was my son at 1 month, and now he's at 3 months, and he weighs twice as much. So at this rate, he's going to be 1 trillion pounds by the time he's 10 years old.
Yes.
Because there's diminishing returns, right? It's linear briefly, but then it slows down, and it's eventually asymptotic. And that's its own kind of psychological challenge when the amount of progress you can make starts to come slower and slower, which I've certainly run into that over 16 years. But I was able to make progress very steadily for a long time. And of course, that linear progress will happen longer under perfect conditions, right? And as a beginner who doesn't know everything, the conditions aren't going to be perfect. You're going to do things in a way that isn't ideal, whether it's your form, or you don't have the right shoes, or you don't have the right mindset, right? So it's like, again, if I went with my current mind back to a beginner's body, I could progress much more efficiently than I actually did in real life, because there's fits and starts. But eventually I changed to similar programming, but making progress weekly instead of every workout. But I was still doing this kind of powerlifting style. And that lasted for years and years until...
And just to put some numbers on this, you were 6 foot, 140 pounds when you started doing this.
Yeah.
How much weight did you put on? What did you get up to?
That's a good question. So...
Is that like 5 years? Is that like 10 years? Like what's the scope of time we're talking about?
I want to say that my initial period of just really focusing on gaining strength and gaining weight, which is not exactly what my broad goal was when I was like on the internet thinking like, I need to make myself good enough to get this kind of a girlfriend or something, right? But this is, again, part of this sort of a bit of a double-edged sword of getting in a community like this, is that my kind of goal shifted to match the acceptable goal of that community, right? Where in the world of starting strength and powerlifting and these kinds of forums, especially at that time, the overwhelming emphasis was on gaining weight and gaining strength. And it was not respectable to care about aesthetics or appearance. In other communities, if you were on bodybuilding.com, that's where Ziz was kind of the idol.
Did you have
a
presence
period.
over there also?
A little bit, but not really. But if you're on bodybuilding.com, you have different goals. If you're on CrossFit.com, which I dabbled in briefly, then your goals are different. But in my world, it was about you need to increase your body weight, which is a way to increase your numbers in the gym. And numbers meaning basically powerlifting, squat, bench, and deadlift. That's what matters, your total. So to answer the question, I think it was the first 3 or 4 years I went consistently. I was all about eating as much as possible, lifting as much as possible. My peak body weight was a little over 200 pounds. I think I got to 205. And if you saw the pictures, I have a few pictures of me then, nobody would see me on the street and say like, there goes a big fat guy. But I was not cut. I was not defined. I had a little bit of a gut going. My face was soft.
That's like what, 65 pounds?
Yeah.
Over 4 years.
Yeah, 4 or so
That's
years.
like 15 pounds a year, more than that?
Yeah, I mean, I was just trying to set PRs on the scale, but I was lifting and, the weight was
You're setting PRs on the scale?
Yeah.
You just eat a bunch of donuts, you set a new PR.
Sure.
You're right.
I wouldn't recommend doing it, like that for anybody, but certainly if you're not lifting. I mean, I don't know if you know the term dreamer bulk.
Dreamer bulk.
This is some old lore. This comes from bodybuilding.com, but I think it was the guy's username on the forum was Dreamer, and it was like he posted these progress images, and he was just like trying to get big, and basically he went from like a skinny kid to like a big fat kid, and it's hard to describe without looking at it, but it became a meme. And so that's the term for when you overdo it. That's doing a dreamer bulk.
Okay.
So I wouldn't.
Well named.
I didn't quite have a dreamer bulk, but my lifts, my all-time PRs, which I definitely hit around between 190 and 200 pounds body weight. I squatted 405 for a single, although I did sets of 5 in like the high 300s, so I feel like I, in theory, could have hit more. But the best single squat I ever did was 405. I deadlifted 525, which deadlift was always my best. And I mean, it's normal proportions will be deadlift is the most, and then squat, and then bench, but it'll vary typically based on your build, your body proportions. So a guy like me, I have long limbs, I have long arms. So long arms make the deadlift range of motion shorter and the bench press range of motion longer. So therefore my deadlift was quite a bit ahead. So I deadlifted 525. My best bench was 290. So I really wanted 300 or 315, which would have been 3 plates. Never happened. Whatever.
You're in the 1,000-pound club.
Oh yeah.
Basically from just your squat and your deadlift, you're within, wow. Okay.
Yeah, but at that time, again, I was focused on the numbers. I'd never done a cut. If you looked at me, I don't know, how other people think of things like this, but I think you'd say, that guy looks strong, but I wasn't like athletic looking, or I remember I have this other really distinct memory of this guy I knew from like the music scene, and he happened to go to my gym in Philly. And I remember one time he said something, it came up in conversation. He's like, yeah, you're bulky. And I took that, it was just so funny for me to hear that term applied to me, because it wasn't, I don't think exactly meant as a compliment or an insult. It felt like a just neutral description, but in my previous life, you never would have described me as bulky. It'd be like,
that's what I'm
skinny, scrawny, whatever. But it wasn't like he wasn't calling me jacked or ripped or anything like that. It was like, you're bulky. And I was like,
right,
damn,
right.
In a sense, I've made it, but also I don't know if bulky is what I want to be.
That feel when fun. Yeah, I mean the real indicator of if you've bulked too far, you're putting up all of these incredible numbers, but your weight is getting up there. You're not shredded. You're not peaked, so to speak. Did you have a girlfriend?
I did. At this time, it's funny. I actually met my girlfriend when I was pretty early on in this journey, and then she got into it too. And this was like this was a really great situation, because we would go to the gym together. She got really strong, and when I was bulking, she was bulking. When I was cutting, she was cutting, which, is fine for two people in a relationship to have separate interests and can support each other in different ways. But it was a very convenient way to live at the time, that we would eat together, we would train together. So she was great. She was very understanding.
I mean, the numbers that you were putting up have to be, if we just took the population, you must be in the 1% or above the 1% statistically. But when you're talking about competing, those numbers, they don't mean the same thing, because then it's the 1% of the 1%, and it's just the curve is like parabolic at the end of it.
And also, you have to remember that all these sports are weight classed, right? And this comes back to this idea that in the strength forums, somebody would look at a guy like me at my height and say, to be competitive, you should be 220, you should be 240, which I took to heart at that time, and then have kind of course corrected since. And again, some of those people would look at me and say, like, you're too skinny, you just need to eat more. But of course, I think it's not controversial to say that genetics are real and impact our ability to express things like muscularity or leanness or height, obviously, right? Like, you don't see a guy who's 5'9" and be like, you need to try harder to get taller, assuming this person is an adult.
If he is under the age of 17 and his epheseal plates have not yet sealed from testosterone signaling, he can do not recommend doing this. He can do weighted hangs, where he attempts to stretch himself out on a medieval rack and possibly gain another half inch or so in his height.
Sure. But assuming,
or
you
die,
know, an adult,
or die as well.
Yeah, right. You know, you can go and get your legs broken and have surgery. But yeah, so
Hard
the point
maxing.
is,
Yeah.
At this point, and this is again one of those struggles where it's like, well, is this true? Am I not? I can look at another guy my height who is bigger than me, muscular, more jacked, more muscular than me, who's maybe been training for less time. And it's like, well, is it that I'm doing something wrong? Maybe, but as time goes on, it's like, even if we're training at not full efficiency, not fully optimally, right? Over long enough time, you'd think that you accrue enough that it builds up. And yet there's guys who have been training for only a couple years who are bigger and leaner than me. And it's like, at a certain point, you gotta say some things you're born with, you know, and
right.
I could have just accepted that when I was 145 and say, well, I can't change this. And obviously I've made a ton of progress, but people have different levels of natural ability. So point being, there are guys who are my height. And again, since height interacts with weight in the sense of the range of motion that your lifts take. So if I were to compete against people that are my weight, given what I weigh now, they'd be much shorter than me. So they can push heavier weights because they are small. You know, a guy could be 170 at 5'6", and he's thicker and more muscular versus a guy who's 6 foot and again might be 220. But when I got to 200 pounds, I was chubby, right. Because my body doesn't want to put on more muscle necessarily.
So in these powerlifting communities, right, we're talking a lot about genetic hierarchies. Very comfortable topic. What are these guys' politics like?
Yeah.
What do they do? They think they're superior? Like, how do they approach other people? Are they compassionate? Are they cruel? Does anybody have like a Ron Paul sticker or something like that?
It's funny because I only became really politicized and really active and aware of the larger space of radical politics, like many people in my generation, around 2016, 2017 is when I got really involved. Before that, I was more of your kind of garden variety, middle-class liberal. I grew up in New Jersey. My family are Democrats, you know, and I always had a lot of the same principles that I have now of empathy and compassion, or what I would now call solidarity, but didn't really know that term, right? But in my early years of getting involved in these sort of communities, I was definitely not aware of politics the way I am now. And, you know, culture war stuff was certainly in the air in 2008 in lots of ways, but it always takes a slightly different form, right? But looking back, I do remember this being an early experience of being in a space with people who were very right-wing on certain issues, but we were all kind of in the mix together, right? Like I can remember at John Schaefer's gym, or I mean, just Mark Ripito is famously Texan libertarian and very socially conservative, although in some regards, you know, Starting Strength famously prescribes, there's no difference in how men and women are supposed to train. So in a sense, it's very gender egalitarian. And if you read the book, Starting Strength, because that's the name of a program, but it's like a textbook. The book, the photos of the people performing the lifts are equally male and female. Mark Ripito, I haven't checked in on him in a while, but also was well known for being not welcoming to trans or queer people. So yeah, you know, all people are a mixed bag, but it was a good, you know, I think there's a lesson over time that you learn about, I don't know, taking what you can from a given experience and not necessarily making everything into a conflict. But certainly that for me was not something that was even conscious at the beginning because again, I wasn't super politicized. But I was going to say at John Schaefer's gym, I remember there being this poster on the wall. It was one of those kind of like 9gag Reddit style humor. And it was like the World War II American propaganda guy holding a mug. And it was like, do your duty, piss off a liberal today or something like that. And I remember looking at it and thinking like, that's kind of goofy, but also like, I don't care. Like, we're here to lift weights, you know? He's going to spot me when I need a spot.
I'd look at that poster now and I'd be like, that's fucking hilarious.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, he's going to spot me when I need a spot. I'm going to cheer for him when it's his PR. Like, it was very much not a kind of space where that stuff was in contention. That being said,
people could put it aside.
Yeah, but it almost wasn't, I don't know. I'm again speaking from my mindset at the time where this stuff was just not the front of mind. I was absolutely not, it never would have occurred to me to try to seek out a space where it's a left-wing space for people to lift. It was just a space for people to lift.
Right.
That being said, the environment for sure was, I would say, right-leaning in a lot of these places. And I mentioned CrossFit, which I kind of dabbled in. CrossFit kind of grew out of law enforcement and military communities, and that's still kind of woven into its DNA. CrossFit has these, what they call hero workouts, like Murph is the name of one that's kind of famous, and they're named after like fallen soldiers, and they're supposed to simulate, in some sense, the experience of fighting in battle.
Wait, did the soldiers, like, I imagine, okay, you're carrying a pack and it's like, oh, he walked, 4 miles through the desert and then he swam and he did all this. And so you recreate all of those activities that this hero did. Do they die at the end?
I mean, they famously can get gravely injured doing CrossFit, but I think it's not quite as one-to-one as that. I shouldn't, speak on CrossFit as I'm not a person of much CrossFit experience.
I've never done it.
I did train at a CrossFit gym, and I did frequent those forums for a while. But hanging out on the Starting Strength forum or the CrossFit forum, certainly you wouldn't describe it as a left-leaning space. And for sure, a kind of controversy has been brewing for years now in terms of trans inclusion in powerlifting, and that used to come up on the Starting Strength forum. And CrossFit is franchise situation, so certainly people seeing this who are CrossFitters might say, well, my gym is different, and that may be true. But in terms of the origins of this stuff, a lot of it comes out of these sort of right-leaning spaces. So there is for sure that bent in a lot of these more serious communities.
Yeah. Well, speaking of trans people, bodybuilders who take exogenous hormones, how many of these guys are just pumped out of their mind on drugs? I feel like I have a pretty good understanding of this now. I've spent a large portion of my adult life lifting, being around fitness communities, trying to understand just the incredibly complex hormonal cascades. When I first started out, I don't think I had any idea that basically everyone who is giving advice on the internet is juiced out of their fucking minds. I don't think I understood that. And having done it for years, and then, spending more and more time in those communities, there are limits to genetic gifts. Now I know what to look for of certain, muscle groups that have higher androgen receptors. Are the traps disproportionate? Are the delts enlarged? What does their skin look like? What are the folds around their mouth? Like all of these kind of telltale signs. Like I can see a physique and now I know, okay, that one's natural, this one's not. As you're browsing all this material in the beginning, can you spot that at the beginning? Like, would you be able to tell that, this guy is lifting that amount because he's taking all of these exogenous hormones? Or would you just be like, oh, he's giving advice and he looks good, I'll take his advice on this?
Certainly was not very well equipped to differentiate stuff like that at the beginning. And even beyond that too, I think I developed some inaccurate ideas early on about the sort of correlation between physique, appearance, and like what level of performance was required.
So
that, like I remember again going back to the very beginning with strong lifts, the very first program I did. Everybody who begins wants to know where they stack up, and set sort of goals in the short, medium, and long term, which is very sensible.
Yep.
And so very common in these communities are these goals for each lift based on body weight, right? Because everything kind of makes more sense to give relative goals than absolute. Common benchmarks would be bench press your body weight, squat 1.5 times your body weight and deadlift double your body weight.
Yeah.
And those are reasonable, I'd say medium term goals for somebody who's new and taking this seriously. But those were really held up as like, I don't know, I kept thinking and being told, if I can squat 1.5 times my body weight, then I'll have made it. I remember this image too that appeared on the Strong Lifts website, and I don't remember the name of this athlete, but I think it was a Turkish Olympic weightlifter. And the image is him shirtless, and I think he's like in competition in between lifts, and he's wearing these, like spandex pants, and his quads are fucking massive, and it looks so cool, and he's totally shredded, like incredible. He looks like a sculpture. And associating that image with squatting 1.5 times your body weight, which that guy probably squats triple his body weight or more,
right.
But thinking it was kind of a refrain in response to beginners with annoying questions. It becomes like, don't worry about this small stuff, squat 1.5 times your body weight and come back, and then you'll be equipped, which, there's some sense to that, but it also is a kind of way of like shutting down the conversation. It's like, you're a noob, you need to build a base of strength.
Right.
Which again, there's some sense to it, but if I were to start fresh with the knowledge I have now, you don't have to, it's not a real prerequisite in any hard and fast sense. But to your question about steroids, it is really difficult and it does complicate things. And I think from what I know now, the median steroid user is a guy who doesn't even necessarily look like he lifts weights. According to the surveys, that I've seen, it's really prevalent. A lot of people are weekend warriors. They take steroids like they take recreational drugs. They are not that serious about lifting. And so a lot of people who are more experienced and wiser will caution against that sort of thing. I knew a guy in San Francisco who I think he only did one cycle, but he was a guy who just liked to experiment, liked to use drugs, liked to try things. And I don't remember if he said he had any real negative experience, but I remember him saying like, oh yeah, I finally deadlifted 405 after I did a cycle. And, I said, well, good job. But in my head, I'm like,
he did a cycle to deadlift 405?
Yeah, which is like, it's cool to deadlift 405, that's great. But to me, he's a 5'10", 6 foot adult man. I think most people can hit a 405 deadlift within a couple years of dedicated training without taking drugs.
Right.
So to me, it's a little bit silly. You probably didn't need to do that to your body. And I think that's probably a pretty typical steroid user. But then also in terms of telltale signs, it's interesting in both directions that there's a lot of people who are spending a lot of time and effort online in communities, the natty or juice style communities where people are looking at any influencer or...
I was posted on one of these Reddit groups.
Okay,
yes.
Yeah, where it's like, this guy has a good physique, is he on steroids? And it becomes so expansive that it's like anybody who looks like they train, we want to dismiss that and say they're on steroids. And again, coming back to this genetic variance, right? Like I think there's a huge range where somebody might be on steroids or they might not. And the jokey kind of default answer is anybody bigger and more shredded than me is on steroids. Anybody smaller and chubbier than me is just a pussy.
Right.
But the fact is there are people who are bigger and more shredded than me who just have better genetics or maybe train smarter and harder than I do. I don't know.
Well, I don't think anybody is more disciplined than your diet and your program, at least from knowing you and just seeing how active you are and how, no, it's just, I mean, it's inspiring, the amount of dedication and the control and the planning that you're doing this. Probably obvious, maybe not even necessary to mention, but you have been on extended cut and you are shredded in peak form for summer right now, which is very, very exciting. Should we talk a little bit about the type of lifting that you do now, which is very different than the starting strength, very different than 5x5 stuff. Still a lot of ego in it. I don't think I'll ever lift without having some ego in the room. Like I like to see a lot of plates, a lot of numbers go up, but you're doing a very different type of program now. And you're much more concerned with how I would describe this, which is I think a process that a lot of lifters go through, is that you compete for those numbers. You try to get those big lifts. You try to get, how much can I squat? How much can I deadlift and so on? And then at a certain point, it's like, okay, well, my physique doesn't really look the way that I want it to look. even though I'm deadlifting hundreds and hundreds of pounds. And you have this conversation with yourself where you try to justify like, well, should I just be lifting more? Should I get more rigorous about my program and my diet and whatever? And for me, like the only real clarity through all of this is that you are doing an art project. It's an aesthetic pursuit. You're building your body like you would build a sculpture, and you're doing that because you think it's a beautiful thing to do. And if you talk to a lot of people who have spent years bodybuilding, they will concede this. Because there's no way to justify it that is like rigorous or strong enough to hold up to that critique. It's like, well, why do you do all this stuff? Because it's art. It's art and it's beautiful. That's why. And art doesn't need a rationale behind it. So the style of lifting that you do now, and I do as well, is much more based around sculpting a certain physique rather than, my entire ego and sense of self is like, whether my bench press hits this number for this week and so on. So could you describe the program that you're doing now?
So to speak a bit to that kind of philosophical underpinning, there is a lot to say and dissect about what is the difference between training like a bodybuilder and training like a powerlifter, for example. And I think to your point, there's a bit that comes to mind from the film Pumping Iron, very famous sort of documentary, but not very strictly reality-based, but I think it was released in 1979, and it was kind of Arnold Schwarzenegger's first big screen moment. But Arnold, in an early scene, is at the gym, at Gold's Gym in California, and he's describing exactly what you're saying, that as a bodybuilder, he sees himself as both the sculptor and the sculpture. And he says, if you're an artist and you're making a sculpture, you say, okay, well, we need more deltoids, or we need the shoulders to be wider. So you just slap on some more clay. But as a bodybuilder, you think that and you're like, okay, so I need to do more exercises. And, so he sees himself occupying both of those roles, which is really fascinating when you think of it that way. And I think many people who haven't thought about it, or maybe kind of dismissive of bodybuilding as just like a vain, superficial pursuit, would do well to consider that mindset. But yeah, It's interesting because like you have a powerlifter and you have a bodybuilder, and they're both lifting weights and they both want to lift more than they did before. So what's the difference? And I think in some sense, people make too much of the difference, but in some sense, maybe they make the opposite mistake, right? Because I guess people might think as a bodybuilder, how much you lift doesn't matter, which in some sense is true, right? If you're competing in bodybuilding, you're stepping on stage and you're posing and you're flexing and you're being judged on how you look. Maybe people don't know this who aren't familiar with competition. You don't lift weights on stage as a bodybuilder. You flex.
You pose.
So yeah, in some sense, the guy might win the competition who can bench less than the guy who didn't win, right? But over time, the only way to make the muscle bigger is to lift more weight. And we could go back and forth about the fine nuances of training, but more or less, I'm pretty confident saying that if you want your muscle to grow, you need to lift more than you did before. But that fundamental kind of guiding principle, being different, does have a lot of downstream effects, where the powerlifter's goal is in and of itself to lift a bigger weight. The bodybuilder's goal is to lift a bigger weight as a means to an end of making a muscle bigger.
You're describing hypertrophy training.
Yes. So the way that I began training was focused on making the weight bigger over time. The way that I train now is focused on making my body bigger over time, but also kind of balancing that with the fat loss so that you can have the muscle be visible, the definition, which to a powerlifter doesn't matter. The fat gain as a powerlifter is a detriment if it moves you up a weight class, again, because that's a part of competition, but nobody cares. It doesn't matter what you look like. So in the peak weight classes for Olympic lifting and powerlifting, guys are fat. They have a big gut,
right.
Which you'll see. But of course, in the lower weight classes, it's very competitive advantage to be lean.
And for people who, because I remember when the very first few years when I started doing this, I didn't really understand why people needed bulking and cutting phases. I just thought, oh, you lose fat, gain muscle, like do it all at the same time.
Right.
Why do you program your hypertrophy with these weeks of bulking and weeks of cutting? Can you just explain to people who haven't yet encountered this before? What's the rationale behind that?
Basically, there are physiological constraints around trying to build muscle and lose fat. when we are very new to training, there's some caveats that have to be given, and to people might object in different ways. But essentially, the body can either gain muscle or lose fat, because when you're gaining muscle, you're eating a energy surplus, you're consuming more energy than you expend, which means you can gain muscle, but along with that muscle gain, there will inevitably be fat gain. Or you can do the opposite. You can be in a deficit where you are consuming less than you expend, and so you are losing fat, but also there's the threat of losing muscle during that time. Now, somebody who's brand new to the gym, they have this kind of magical state where they can do both at once. Or somebody who's coming back to training after a long layoff, or somebody who starts off very overfat, like an obese person, or somebody who is new to drugs. Right? You're taking powerful hormones you've never taken before. You can kind of break out of that constraint. But in the broad sense, in most situations, or to a first approximation, people can kind of be in a surplus or deficit. And that means you're either gaining muscle or you're losing fat. So we tend to separate those out. And this makes a lot of sense. If you're competing in bodybuilding, the competitor will tend to have a season where they have a show at a certain point and they start preparing for the show, maybe 12 weeks out or 16 weeks out, and this is prep. You're dieting, you're coming in and you're trying to peak, you're trying to come in at your leanest, at your sharpest, at your best possible look, exactly on the moment that you step on stage. And this is a big part of bodybuilding, timing that. Right? Because that extreme leanness that is required to be competitive at a high level is not something that is sustainable. It's something that you try to hit right at that moment. And sort of similarly for a powerlifter, you're not concerned about how you look, but your peak performance, you want that to happen exactly on the day of the competition. So you build your strength and you build your strength, but you'll have a certain period of pulling back because you don't want to go into the competition beat up from your training.
You got to be fully recovered so that you can,
Right. So both of these disciplines, or any athletic performance, right, in the off season is about building your capabilities, but then you want to be fresh on game day, right?
And so just to get like the scope of how much time and preparation we're talking about here, because this, I think when I first came across this, it was surprising to me, but you're on a cut right now. Are you on week 8 or week 10?
Today, this is really fortuitous timing. This is the very last day, which is great for me because this is the sharpest my features will ever look. This is the very last day of my cut this year, which this marks the end of 10 weeks.
10.
Which I feel good about. I've been doing this as a kind of yearly thing for a little while now. But last year, I dieted for 14 weeks. And this year it's 10. I had planned to do 8 weeks. And it's another kind of psychological challenge, right? Because you can almost always keep going and get leaner, right? I feel very good about what I accomplished in 10 weeks. I feel good about how I look. And yet, I'm not lean enough to step on a bodybuilding stage. Now, that wasn't my goal.
Sure.
Because that's extreme. Bodybuilding's an extreme sport. And there comes a point which I feel like I'm kind of at the threshold of, where going further into low body fat starts to have a lot of side effects, a lot of detrimental symptoms.
Your T levels are going to plummet, they're going to crash.
Hormones
get
out of whack.
Muscle wasting.
Yeah.
You're about as lean as you could be without starting to incur negative health effects, is how I would describe it.
I would like to think so. That would be a good...
And so if you're on week 10 right now, so this is what I had to learn getting into this stuff, is that's 10 weeks to trim off the fat that you put on this year to increase your muscle mass, to increase your lean mass. Before you did that, I'm going to guess that you did a maintenance period of probably about a month, something like that.
Yeah, I mean, what I'm getting ready to do next week that I'm very excited about, because I've been in this self-denial phase for 10 weeks, but I will slowly increase. I mean, I'm going to go out tonight to a restaurant, which I have not done in 10 weeks.
Enjoy it.
And I'm going to have a nice meal. I'm going to go to an Italian place. I'm going to eat some pasta. It's going to be great. But yes, I mean, some people, again, to the detrimental effects of extreme leanness, obviously, there's a danger of disordered eating that comes along with this kind of thing. And part of that is body dysmorphia, and part of that is binging that comes at the end of a diet.
Right.
And I've seen bodybuilders they get so shredded for the competition, and then a few weeks later, they're super soft. Like people put on crazy amounts of weight in a really short amount of time, which this is not something that I've fortunately ever struggled with too much in any direction, and I think it is hard to find a balance between in anything, right? How can we both push ourselves to improve and be ambitious and say, I want to be better tomorrow than I was today, but at the same time, not lapse into overly self-criticism, right? Or thinking I'm never good enough, or I'm never satisfied, like stay hungry, but also allow yourself a sense of pride and accomplishment. And that's challenging, but it's something that I think I've done about as well with as anybody could, in terms of I want to get better, but I'm also happy with how I've done so far. So yeah, I will gradually increase over time, and basically I'll continue tracking for some time, and then eventually, for the most part, my diet is pretty consistent day to day, which I don't have much trouble with. I go out to eat, but only once or twice a week, in general. Like I wouldn't want to do it more than that. If you're somebody whose life revolves around partying and going to restaurants, that's a challenge. But yeah, I keep track of my weight, and when I'm gaining weight, I just make sure that it's not too fast. And I think that's about the best you can do, along with keeping track of your numbers in the gym. And if your body weight's going up, but your lifts aren't going up, that's a bad signal, or a sign that you need to adjust something. But if I see my performance in the gym is going up, I'm feeling strong, and I'm slowly gaining weight, it's hard to know, right, what percent of body weight you're gaining is muscle versus fat. And when you've been doing it for as long as I have, you have to accept that most of those gains are not going to be muscle. Like over the past year before this cut, I've put on 15 to 20 pounds. And if I'm being, again, I can't answer with any precision, but probably the best I could have hoped for was that 3 pounds of muscle, which is quite significant.
That's after 15, 16 years? Yeah. That's 3 is a lot.
Yeah, and it might not even be that, but that's just, again, that's kind of the nature of human physiology and diminishing returns. And without getting on drugs, that's just kind of the name of the game. And so there is an adjustment psychologically, emotionally, that you have to make as you get older, if you want to stick with it, to your expectations of progress. But I'll slowly increase. I'll keep track of those things. And I see it as this period of self-denial and abstemiousness is sort of what enables me to be relatively carefree for the other 42 weeks of the year, and that brings me a sense of psychological confidence and safety and balance. Some people would look at this 10-week thing I'm doing where I'm being totally strict and think that it's crazy, or that it's, again, some people would possibly say, oh, that's extreme or disordered, and I really don't think so. I think it is very healthy to practice a period of self-denial that is offset then, or in balance with a period of moderation and a period of indulgence. You can't have one without the other. It's sort of a dialectic. So it allows me then to feel not guilty about cutting loose in the times that I want to, or I don't have to stress about having a beer or having dessert sometimes, the rest of the year. So it's kind of like, this is the time that I buckle down, and that affords me the freedom to be pretty chill the rest of the time. How do I know what information is trustworthy? How do I know what is a high quality source? And this can manifest itself in politics, in fitness, in any arena you can imagine, right? There's no shortage of information. How, as a person who doesn't already know the answers, it's that same catch-22. When I'm looking for a trainer to teach me, it's like I'm trying to evaluate an expert. How can a novice evaluate an expert? I can't.
Right.
So how do I figure out what information is trustworthy? And we don't know. There is no good answer to that. And again, that's why it is tough to give advice, even from where I'm standing now. If somebody comes to me and they want advice, I'm reticent to do so, because I understand why that person might be skeptical of what I'm saying, or want me to prove my bona fides or something, but I don't really want to. So I'm kind of take it or leave it. But also at the same time, I think you maybe fundamentally have to go through a certain amount of trial and error. Or, to make another analogy, it's like if you're a parent, I'm not, but many of my friends at this point have young children. It's like, do you want your children to struggle in life, or do you want them to be comfortable? And I think most people think, well, I want my kids to be comfortable. I don't want them to suffer the way I did, maybe. But you built your character through the hardship and through the struggle. And so if you give your children, the next generation, a life that involves no hardship and no struggle, will they learn those same lessons that you learned, or will they come out spoiled and foolish, So I think
participation trophies.
Yeah, there is some sense in which we all have to learn things for ourselves through experience, which I find, as a person who values learning, book learning and intellectual pursuits and the transmission of knowledge and information, that's frustrating that there might be this kind of insurmountable hurdle where it's like, I could tell you something to a really fine degree of specificity because I learned it, but there's some level on which you can't absorb that just from the telling of it and the hearing or reading about it. You have to experience something in order to understand it.
Well, I'll give you two examples of this. Just first, for the record, like, my plan for my children is to just cast them out onto Mongolian steppes and let them be warriors.
Yeah.
That's my parental strategy. And I would say that I took your advice, and your advice worked for me.
Okay.
And it improved my program, and I was doing all this dumb meathead shit before, and now I lift a lot smarter. My physique is way better. My amount of mass, musculature is at the same level or improved, and I'm leaner. So I definitely experienced, and this might not be the case for everybody, but it worked for me. I will say that. So I'll give you these two examples of like taking advice from people, trying to cultivate character and things like that. My parents, both boomers, really valued education, got the best slice of the American economy, like in the history of the US, in the whole fucking solar system. There was never a better time to be born, to get a house, to go to school, upward mobility, here on for forever. And it was great. It worked great for them. They really valued a work ethic. They really valued a work ethic. And so when I was a teenager, before I could drive, like all these things, they always made sure that I had some type of either a summer job or also during the school year, so middle school, high school, whatever. I'd be a cashier, I'd work at the orchard, like, not like complicated jobs, but just something that was supposed to instill in me the value of hard work, right? Which was the boomer experience, right? They got these jobs that just paid them, astronomical amounts of money for doing relatively low-skilled stuff. And I did all that. It was supposed to instill in me the value of work and so on. As an adult, I now see kids who were the age that I was. Like, a 15-year-old is just going to buy some shit coin and get unfathomably wealthy overnight. There's no amount of time that working at a grocery store is going to give you upward mobility in today's society in 2024. So the degree to which my parents thought that built character, I would say that kind of lesson doesn't exist, because the underlying political economic circumstances that subtended their assumption of the value of hard work, that has disintegrated. And now it's just like really clear that the economy is completely asymmetrical and corrupt, and working hard gets you in a shittier position in life. The best thing to do is just sit back, speculate on finance, and not actually work very hard at all. The other thing that, so this is example number 2, is that when I went into the gym, I learned a very different value of hard work in that I could see my body change. I felt more confident. I felt more handsome. I did things that I physically was not capable to do a few weeks before, a few months before, definitely years before. And the way that affected the rest of my life, it gave me confidence to do things that I wasn't able to do. Like public speaking, for example. People are terrified of public speaking. Not a very direct through line to say that if you go to the gym, you'll get better at public speaking, but all sorts of things where I needed to have some kind of belief in myself, I was able to do that through the gym. And so this idea of building character, whether you exist in a political economy that is fascism, liberal democracy, socialism, Soviet authoritarianism, what doesn't fucking matter, a 45-pound plate is a 45-pound plate. And so that does build a kind of character and confidence. Having somebody go to work as a teenager and learn the value of sitting in front of a cashier that was a bad idea. I'm sorry to tell my parents, but there's different versions of this. And I think, in some cases, it is good to be challenged and to learn how to challenge yourself in other areas of your life, of things you didn't think you were capable of doing. Can I finish my book? Can I finish my movie? Can I buy a house? All of these things that might be scary. Can you go to the doctor? Shit like this. That's like adult stuff. And if kids are not challenged to have to achieve those things, we kind of have a society of this very prolonged adolescence. Prolonged adolescence, especially for young men, is where it's most pronounced. And the internet is certainly part of what is cultivating that, but it's also a social thing where we've kind of prevented people from having learning experiences and from challenging themselves and so on. All of this is to say that I generally agree with what you're saying. It's good to be challenged. And I'm curious if you've been in these spaces, let's say you started 2008 or so. We're spanning a long time in different eras of the internet. So that's pre-social media, 2012, this enormous spike of your mom, dad, aunt, and uncle is on social media. 2016, we get fake news and filter bubbles and echo chambers and all this shit. How has the internet further exaggerated this environment of maybe not being challenged and then seeking out information for which there is no definitive expert?
I do want to emphasize, to begin with, one of the things that you were saying about the nature of physical training and the role that it plays in, I guess, character building. I've long kind of valued my training for being a space of, I suppose, fewer outside variables than most that we might encounter in life, right? Like your example about trying to work a job and build your finances or whatever, that depends partly on your behavior and your inputs, but also on a huge amount of things that are beyond you that you have no control over. An economy, right? This incredibly complex, multivariate system that is basically may as well be random from your perspective. Now, when I'm in the gym, of course, there are limitations and constraints that I can't control, whether it's my genetics or like the time that I have in the week to dedicate to it. But I would say, I feel comfortable saying that most people have some ability to push themselves along this dimension, right? And so in that space, for me, it's a place where I'm not dependent on somebody else's benevolence, somebody else hiring me or giving me an opportunity. I'm creating that opportunity. And what I get out of it is, if not directly equal, at least proportional to what I put into it. And I think that is a really valuable experience to have. So it's a space of control relative, again, to this broader world of chance and randomness, which I find really gratifying and grounding. As to how the internet has changed, obviously, people aren't so much on these kind of purposeful communities or single purpose websites anymore. We're on these large platforms. Things get disseminated through Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and what have you. And we still have kinds of similar, I guess, cults of personality to, like, whereas before it would have been Mark Rippetoe, he's still around as far as I know, but you have whoever, I don't know, the people are watching on TikTok or whatever. Although I think the shift to largely video format comes along with incentives, of course, more pressure to look a certain way and more value being placed on that. And then, of course, it's all kind of downstream from what these platforms incentivize. So if you have an algorithm that rewards, it's all about engagement in the end, right? Eyeballs and clicks and whatever. So novelty breeds engagement. Flashiness breeds engagement. So the guy doing something that you've never seen before that catches your eye.
Dangerous behavior too. A lot of young people taking, very heavy drug dosages before they've even gone in to do a few years as a natural lifter.
Sure. Yeah, that's a huge aspect of it. Or also separate from that, right? Even in terms of what movements you want to do, right? And this is a thing I think you'd hear echoed from a lot of people who've been doing this for a long time. The truth is, what works in the long run is pretty boring and pretty plain Jane and consistent, It's important to shift things over time, over years, as your goals developed. But I was squatting 16 years ago and I'm still squatting, that doesn't, it serves a different role in my programming, and I might do different types of squat and different periods, but like I'm not doing one-legged Bosu ball, plyometric, whatever. But like somebody who's scrolling on TikTok, I mean, this stuff is everywhere, right? You see a guy who's really shredded, and like the ab circuit is one of a fascinating example because it's one of the most common things that you'll see, but it's the most disconnected from the actual goal, right? Like you want your abs to pop and to be shredded. And so you see this guy whose abs pop and he's shredded and he's doing this whole complicated routine of wood chopping and mountain climbers and all this stuff.
Right.
And then so if I post a photo when at the end of a cut where my abs are popping, people say, "What's your ab routine?" And I do not have an ab routine. I don't train my abs directly at all, because the reason they look like that is because I have low body fat, because I've dieted. I've built some muscle in my core from pretty much entirely indirectly from pushing weights overhead or picking things up off the floor. Now, if you have an athletic goal for like gymnastics, you want to do a planche or a front lever that requires a different level of abdominal control. In that context, it makes sense. Or if you're playing football or a sport where you need to have a certain level of endurance for your core. I'm not saying nobody should do that, but I think there's a very commonly held idea, and it comes back to these things that are really common on social media because they look impressive, because they look flashy, and there's this massive disconnect between what you're seeing and what actually went into building the physique that you see. So, but again, the incentive on these video platforms are to do something eye-catching, and both eye-catching and novelty, right? If you're that person who's putting out video content and you put out a really good video on how to do a squat and the technique and all the ins and outs and all the different exceptions, that's going to run out. How long can you spend doing that? So you got to do a different video, and you're going to eventually exhaust the realm of possibility of exercises that are like normal and effective. So you have to start doing things that are novel and different. And I think this is huge right now. Or
yeah, there's heavy incentives to just like make up slightly different postures of doing exercises.
Yeah, you see this again. I see this stuff mostly in the sense of people that I follow debunking it or being like, don't listen to this stuff. Or like people who want to come up with a new way to interact with a piece of equipment, right? Like a common one is the lat pull down machine has a pad that you hook your legs under, which is useful because you might be doing a pull down with greater than your body weight. Or even if you're not, the point of that is stability. I want to be locked in so that I can effectively train my lats. And then you see people saying like, gym hack, actually face the opposite way. So now your legs aren't hooked under there. It's like, first of all, if I did that,
you're pulling yourself up.
Yeah, I'm doing a pull up or I'm just being pulled to the ceiling on this thing.
Right.
So it's the guise of novelty. We're like, ooh, I never thought of that before. I'm going to try that. But if it's a disregard for the fundamentals of the training, it's like, this is my biggest criticism of what a lot of things people do in the gym. And I think most of the time they just don't know better, but you have to ask yourself, what is the point of this thing I'm doing? Whether that is it because I want to get better at this exercise, at this movement, which maybe is the case. If I'm deadlifting because I want to get better at deadlifting, that makes sense. That's why I'm deadlifting. But if I'm deadlifting because I want to build my quads, for example, I don't know if anybody has that thought process, but you have to ask yourself, is the deadlift a good way to build my quads? And I would say it probably isn't. So maybe you shouldn't be deadlifting. Now, if you just like deadlifting, that's cool. I like deadlifting. But again, it's like, am I doing this ab circuit? Is that going to give me the abs that I want? Is there a process here that makes sense? And I think a lot of what people are doing, like a really famous one that I make fun of a lot, but you will see in gyms, is people want to do external rotations for their shoulders, which is good. It's a good warm up. It's a good, you want to keep your external rotator strong, but they don't understand maybe how it actually works. So they will be standing with dumbbells and doing external rotations. Now the problem is the external rotation is this movement, but gravity is pointing that way. So you're not actually being resisted in the plane of the movement. Really easy fix, you lay on your side and now you're externally rotating against gravity, or do it with a cable or a band. So now that motion is actually what's being resisted. So just a simple example, but I see
what
this
do you think about the guys who do it like this?
Well, so this is different, right? If I'm doing this, I'm perpendicular to the vector of gravity, right? As opposed to doing this where I'm not.
I see this all the time.
Yeah.
All the time.
Yeah, which again, that makes sense with bands or cables, but not with a dumbbell.
Not with the, yeah.
It's like if I were, there's a reason that when you do a bench press, you're lying down because then my chest and triceps are opposing gravity. If I were to try to do a bench press standing up, then I'm not pushing against the direction of the load, which I saw, it was somebody sitting on a Peloton. And to be fair, they were doing what was on the screen in front of them, but it was like a strength in between. And it was holding a dumbbell and pressing it this way. And I'm just like, your delts are doing some isometric work, but this movement is not being resisted in that sense. So again, I think just having a sort of structure, a mental structure of analysis for why am I doing this movement? What is the purpose of this? What is my goal and how is this getting me towards that goal? That kind of mindset goes a long way in making sure that your training is safe and effective.
Speaking of exercises that are purely just punishing, you used to have, I have to ask about this, you used to have a very interesting birthday ritual that involved some pretty significant lifting. Do you want to tell us about what you would do and how long you did that for?
I think this is a thing that I didn't make up because I saw somebody else talking about birthday squats recently, but this was a ritual that I did for a while. It was sort of like a way of flipping the bird at aging and death. But every year on my birthday, the rules were I would load up the barbell with my body weight and I would do a single set of squats and as many reps as I was years old. And there's a whole kind of cult around high rep squats. There was a program I think that started back in the 70s. I think it was called Super Squats, and it was about doing a set of 20 every week. And the way people used to talk about it, I read about this first back in the starting strength days. They would say, load up the bar with your 10 rep max and then do 20 with it, which of course is self-contradictory, doesn't really make sense. But I guess what that often demonstrates is that what you thought was your 10 rep max is not actually, which I think there's a whole other lesson to be taken from that in terms of what we learn about ourselves in the gym in terms of being able to do more than we believed we could. But anyway, it's famously very, very uncomfortable to do high reps of squats. I'd say anything more than 10. I mean, to be honest, I came up being very used to doing sets of 5. So the joke I would make is more than 5 reps is cardio to me, meaning it's unpleasant. I don't want to do it. It's a lot. But yeah, so I did this from age like in my late 20s until my mid 30s. I think the last time I did it, it was like I was 34. And if you've never done something like this, it is...
So you were like, what, 190 pounds? Doing 30 reps of your body weight?
Yeah, like 180. I remember doing, 34 reps. I think I have a video of me doing...
Did you just pass out after that?
It's really very uncomfortable. I mean, it takes a long time because it's, with a set like that, it's hard on your legs, but it's like doing a sprint of like 400, 800 meters. Your lungs are burning. All kinds of muscles start to feel like they're on fire that are not directly involved. Like your calves start to hurt and then your biceps start to hurt. And yeah, and I don't want to valorize this because this was a thing in CrossFit that they had a mascot called Pukey the Clown, and it became like a thing to show how tough you were if you could make yourself puke. But I did a couple times
okay, I didn't know that.
After a workout.
Wow.
I remember once.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah, so doing a squat workout like this, I think this was in my earlier days where I was like really pushing the numbers. I think I had 275 on the bar. I had it was called a slap tear in my shoulder, which is just cartilage that was torn. And again, it wasn't like one day in the gym, it went snap. It was kind of over time, but it led to, it was painful. There were many different follow-ups with doctors until it was finally determined this can't be fixed other than surgically. But there was kind of like sort of an epiphany that I had, or I remember, I'm not a religious person, but I remember sort of praying and wanting to make a deal with God, where thinking if I can just lift again. I won't do, because I was doing gymnastics at that point. I had kind of shifted gears and said, I want to have a front lever. I want to have a planche. I want to do a handstand push-ups, which all that stuff is super cool. But I don't know that led to the injury per se, but I remember thinking, all I want is to lift again.
You just be grateful for the little you do have.
Yes.
You don't need anything
saying,
on top
I promise
of it.
I won't do anything stupid. I'm not going to try to do anything wacky. I just want to lift again. So once I recovered, which thankfully I did 100%, I haven't had any shoulder issues since, but then I just went back to a much more straightforward, not doing really novel, wacky stuff.
We've covered kind of a wide range of stuff, different styles of lifting, different periods of internet history, different philosophies involved in this type of practice. Of all the people you've met, have you known anyone who got really into lifting and then became a right-wing extremist?
I don't think so. I think for sure the question of like, is lifting right wing is something that I have thought about a lot, because I've seen people having these conversations, or I think a lot of right-wing people want to put out the idea that it is. And I think fundamentally the question is kind of flawed.
I've seen a lot of these right-wingers. They're not getting any time in the gym. I can tell you that.
But here's the thing, even if they were, right? Like, what is the takeaway? What does that mean? Like, if a guy is really jacked and has fascist politics, does that somehow validate fascism, or does that somehow create a link between fascism and physical strength? I don't think it does. I think for all sorts of reasons that I think are totally contingent, this has become a cultural trope in the current society, right? That liberals or left-wing people are fully live in the world of abstraction and idea and the intellect, where grit and strength and self-reliance is the realm of right-wing. And I just fundamentally reject that, and would hope to maybe be a living example of the fact that that isn't true.
What you're describing here, just to put this in the very simplest, stupidest terms, is that the kind of high school politics that we internalize of there being, as you said, jocks and nerds, we often transpose that onto the two-party political system and the left-right binary of a political spectrum, in that if you use your mind, you have one political leaning. If you use your body, you have another. And they don't cross over, meaning that if you use your body, you are stupid.
Yeah.
That's actually the direct through line.
Right.
In that, the meme says, where do you work out? At the library.
Yeah.
This kind of thing. That someone who pursues an intellectual life, a political life, a philosophical life, necessarily must not be using their body.
Right, which I used to buy into, and a part of this epiphany that I had, which I remember really clearly, was the thought that, a lot of people who are really good at lifting weights and who are strong and look good are really dumb. And that's true. I don't think that there's a causative relationship, but I think it's probably not controversial to say there are dumb people who are physically impressive. But then I thought, okay, but if they can figure it out despite being dumb, surely I can, using my vast intellect, also figure it out. And so I took this very nerdy book learning style approach to teaching myself about anatomy and physiology and lifting, and this very deliberate approach, which I also took when I was learning guitar. I was like, okay, I'm behind. These other people have a head start, but I can learn music theory, and that will be an accelerator, right? And so all these things were valuable lessons to me in discovering my ability to teach myself things. But I think anybody can, if you want it, if you're dedicated to it. It's exactly the opposite of the notion that these things are in opposition, right? That as a smart person, you have an advantage in being able to study and being able to learn. You might not, clearly, if you're not naturally strong and athletic, tautologically, you have an uphill battle at becoming that way. But you also, if you're intelligent, if you're someone who's willing to read, who can incorporate new information from study, that same ability and skill can be applied to the realm of the physical, which I think it would behoove them to understand that.
We can hope.
And I really think that people do themselves a disservice, like I certainly used to, by having this attitude of essentially throwing out the baby with the bathwater, right? Where they think, okay, this negative quality, whether it's like having bad politics or being whatever, this X type of person, I associate that with this other activity. So therefore, I think that that activity or that pursuit is somehow negatively tainted, right? Whether it is lifting, because I think that jocks are assholes, or I think that, strength training is for right-wing Nazis, or I think that coding, like I don't like tech bros, or I don't like the tech industry, like as you mentioned, I like programming. Programming's fun and it's cool and it can be put to good use. And there's people in prominent public eye that do it in a very destructive way, right? Like a lot of us have negative perceptions of big tech corporations, but that doesn't mean that you as a compassionate, intelligent person can't learn to code and make something useful or fun or artistic with it.
This is also one of the tremendously significant, important mistakes, strategic mistakes that liberals and the left make frequently in the past few years, where you're describing these contested spaces of fitness and coding and so on and so forth, that when you unilaterally rule these spaces out of the pools of people from which you are trying to recruit to your political movement, you are ceding them to the other side. You are emboldening, you are empowering your political opponent.
Right.
So if you think there is a connection, whether this is true or not, but just from their perspective, if you think there is a causal connection, that would make those spaces even more important to contest, to recruit people from, to do targeted outreach to those communities so that you are not empowering your political opponents. And the failure to do that has been an enormous strategic mistake in the past few years.
For sure. And I think, we've seen things like one that comes to mind is that I think a lot of left-wing people have gotten into firearms training and guns in the past 5 or 10 years, which I think is traditionally, culturally seen as a space reserved for the right wing, like the NRA and your gun-toting Republican, right? But then a lot of the joke is if you go far enough left, you get your guns back, because liberals don't want guns. They're for gun control, again, speaking in stereotypes. But then you have socialists and communists who are saying, no, the proletariat must be armed, and so et cetera, et cetera. So they're into it. And again, I'm not necessarily trying to glorify guns or promote one way or the other, but I do always feel that more knowledge and skill and ability is better than less, right? So learning how to handle guns doesn't mean you are going to need to own one or carry one or shoot somebody, but why wouldn't you want to know how to do it? Why wouldn't I want to know how to grow food or lift a heavy weight or write a program? These are all things that you empower yourself by gaining these skills. So yeah, absolutely. I think we should not allow our political opponents to kind of define useful skills and abilities as their own proprietary domain, right? We're disarming,
right.
Literally, figuratively. Like lifting is left wing if I say it is. I don't think it really is either. Of course, it's kind of ahistorical too, because the communists, like the Soviet bloc, were famously high performing weightlifters. Bulgaria was known as like the most elite Olympic weightlifting. China is still
right.
The US performs very poorly on the international stage.
A lot of people still do this Bulgarian training.
Yeah. And the US has not been good in Olympic weightlifting for a long time, and I think there's a lot of factors that contribute to that. Like all of our most highest performing athletic talent will go into like professional football, for instance, when they could have been weightlifting. But yeah, it's very myopic and unfortunate to accept the framing that something like becoming strong, it makes you a fascist.
Yeah. Well, you heard it here first. If you go far enough left, you get your weights back.
Yes.
Young Chomsky, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I just have such tremendous admiration for your work as an artist, as a musician, and then also your expertise in fitness has made a big difference in my life, and I'm very grateful for that. And
that is really
I've just
gratifying.
enjoyed so many of our conversations, and this has been a wonderful experience. So thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm really glad to hear that it's been useful for you, and this was a fun conversation.
Yeah, and then we'll do something in the future about menswear, how to dress, and all that stuff that we didn't even get to today.
Yeah.
But that'll be a future episode.
I will be happy to come back and talk about that.